A wealthy black CEO walks into his own five-star hotel, expecting a seamless experience. But instead, he's met with judgment, suspicion, and outright humiliation from a receptionist who assumes he doesn't belong. What happens next will shock everyone. David Reynolds walked into the grand lobby of one of the most luxurious hotels in New York. His hotel, as the owner and CEO of Reynolds Luxury Hotels, he had built this empire from the ground up, turning it into a world-class destination for the elite. But today, no one recognized him. Instead of receiving a warm welcome, he was met with a cold, judgmental stare from the receptionist. She glanced at him once, then twice, her lips pressing into a thin line. And just like that, she made a decision, one that would change everything. "Sir, this area is for guests only. You need to leave." You won't believe how this receptionist reacts when she discovers the truth. What did she say next? And how did she just make the biggest mistake of her career? Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more gripping real-life stories. This is a story about racism, bias, and the dangers of making assumptions. A successful black man is judged by his appearance, but in the end, justice will be served in the most unexpected way. David Reynolds stood still for a moment, his eyes scanning the lavish surroundings of the Reynolds Grand Hotel. The towering marble pillars, the golden chandeliers reflecting off polished floors, and the soft hum of jazz playing in the background. All of it represented the empire he had built from the ground up. His empire. Yet, as he approached the front desk, he felt the same cold reality he had faced so many times before. David was a self-made millionaire, a visionary in the hospitality industry, and the CEO of Reynolds Luxury Hotels. He had worked tirelessly, not just to create a business, but to revolutionize the hotel experience, offering the best service, the finest amenities, and an experience that left guests in awe. Despite all that, he still faced discrimination. It didn't matter how many awards he won, how many hotels bore his name, or how much wealth he had accumulated. To some people, he would never look the part. Today, he had arrived at his own hotel unannounced, wearing a simple but elegant outfit. Tailored dark slacks, a crisp white shirt, and a sleek designer watch. He wasn't flashy, and he preferred it that way. He wanted to blend in, to observe how his staff treated their guests. But as soon as he stepped up to the reception desk, he felt the shift in energy. Emily Lawson, the front desk receptionist, had been working at the Reynolds Grand Hotel for years. In her mind, she knew exactly who belonged in a place like this and who didn't. She was in her mid-30s, well-dressed with blonde hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. Everything about her posture, from the way she stood behind the marble, counter to the polite but forced smile on her lips, oozed superiority. Emily took great pride in working at one of the most prestigious hotels in New York. To her, the hotel's exclusivity mattered more than anything, and she saw herself as one of the gatekeepers of that exclusivity. The moment David stepped forward, her expression subtly changed. She had just been warmly greeting a well-dressed white couple, smiling, engaging in polite conversation, offering them an upgrade to a suite. But now, her smile faded. Her gaze flicked up and down, scanning David's outfit, his posture, his presence. And just like that, she made a judgment. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She leaned slightly away from the counter, her fingers tapping against the keyboard. She didn't recognize him, and in Emily's mind, if she didn't recognize someone in a place like this, They probably didn't belong. David immediately noticed the difference in tone. Just moments ago, Emily had been radiating warmth, laughing softly as she upgraded another guest's room. Now, she was stiff, guarded, and polite in a way that didn't feel polite at all. He had seen this before. Too many times. As he stood in front of the desk, he watched the scene unfold with quiet disappointment. He could feel the weight of the moment, the way she hesitated, the way she barely looked him in the eye, the way she was already preparing to turn him away. And then her first words confirmed everything. "Sir, this area is for guests only. If you need directions to public facilities, I can assist you." David exhaled slowly. It had begun. David held Emily's gaze for a moment, the weight of her assumption settling between them. The polished floors gleamed under the soft lobby lights, the air thick with the faint scent of fresh flowers and expensive cologne. The elegance of the Reynolds Grand Hotel was undeniable, but so was the shift in energy when he approached. He could feel it in the way Emily barely looked at him, in the way her tone had hardened ever so slightly. "Sir, this area is for guests only. If you need directions to public facilities, I can assist you," she said coolly. David's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained calm. He had seen this before. Different locations, different people, same attitude. "I have a reservation," he replied simply, sliding his ID toward her. Emily hesitated. There was something about his confidence that unsettled her, but instead of reevaluating her assumptions, she doubled down. She let out a soft, dismissive smirk. "Oh, under whose name?" Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she hadn't even attempted to check the system. David kept his expression neutral. He knew where this was going, but he wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of reacting. "David Reynolds." Emily's smirk twitched slightly, but she quickly masked it. She picked up his ID, frowning as she inspected it. Instead of immediately processing his check-in, Emily hesitated again. She was searching for a problem. Her eyes flicked over his ID, then to the system. She typed his name in slowly, deliberately, as if expecting the screen to tell her it was a mistake. After a few seconds, she exhaled sharply and shook her head. "This hotel has high standards, sir. We don't do cash payments or same-day walk-ins," she said, placing his ID back on the counter without even completing the check-in process. David's fingers brushed over his ID, but he didn't pick it up. This was it. She wasn't just hesitant. She had decided he didn't belong. And that was when the final confirmation came. From behind him, another guest stepped forward, a middle-aged white man dressed in a casual but expensive suit. Before David could say another word, Emily's entire demeanor changed. Her posture straightened. Her expression brightened. "Welcome to the Reynolds Grand Hotel, sir," she said cheerfully. "How can I assist you today?" David watched in silence as she flashed a warm smile at the new guest, her entire attitude shifting in an instant. The contrast was undeniable. The man barely noticed what had just happened. He smiled back, nodding politely before pulling his wallet out. "I have a reservation under Carter." Emily immediately typed his name in without hesitation. David remained still. Other guests in line had noticed. A woman in a beige dress shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking between David and Emily. A young couple exchanged a quick glance, the man whispering something to his partner. The tension was palpable. David exhaled slowly. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even angry. He was just tired. Without another word, David pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb pausing on a familiar number before pressing dial. The phone rang twice before a voice picked up. "Hey, I just arrived. Can you meet me at the front desk?" Emily didn't react at first, but then she noticed something. As soon as David spoke, one of the senior managers, a man in a navy suit, suddenly froze mid-step. His head snapped toward the front desk, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized the voice. In an instant, the manager hurried toward them. Emily's smug confidence faltered. Something was wrong. She glanced at David, again her mind racing, the way the manager was walking toward them. Fast, urgent, as if something huge was happening. It didn't make sense. Her heart pounded, and then, as the manager reached the desk, her world began to collapse. The sharp click of polished dress shoes against the marble floor echoed through the grand lobby as the hotel manager rushed toward the front desk. His face was tight with urgency, his steps quick, his focus solely on the man standing in front of Emily. "Mr. Reynolds." His voice carried across the room, filled with unmistakable respect. "We didn't expect you today. Is everything all right?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Mr. Reynolds?" The name hit her like a shock wave. Her heart pounded violently in her chest. The man she had just dismissed, humiliated, and assumed didn't belong, was the owner of the hotel. She stiffened, gripping the edge of the counter as if it could ground her against the sheer force of realization. The color drained from her face as the weight of her mistake settled in. She had just disrespected the CEO of Reynolds Luxury Hotels. David turned to her slowly, his expression unreadable. The power dynamic in the room had just shifted entirely. The woman she had smirked at moments ago, thinking she was in control, was now sinking in her own fear. Emily had worked at the Reynolds Grand Hotel for years, moving up the ranks, believing she understood exactly who belonged and who didn't. She had prided herself on upholding the hotel's exclusivity, catering to high-profile guests and ensuring that the right people felt welcome. And yet she had just insulted the man who built it all. David let the silence stretch between them, the tension growing with each passing second. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to look angry. His calm, composed stance alone was enough to make her skin crawl with discomfort. Finally, he spoke. "Is this how you treat your guests? Or just the ones you assume don't belong?" Emily's throat tightened. She needed to respond, to fix this, to find a way out of the mess she had created. I thought," she stammered, but the words barely formed before David cut her off. "You thought I was beneath this place?" His tone was measured, but the weight behind his words crushed her. Emily's lips parted, but no words came out. The confidence she once had shattered completely. A heavy, suffocating silence had fallen over the lobby. The whispers had started. Staff members exchanged nervous glances, frozen in place. A few guests turned, subtly watching the scene unfold. Others, less discreet, had already pulled out their phones, their cameras capturing the moment as it played. Out. A woman in line shook her head in quiet disapproval. She had seen everything. A young couple nearby exchanged glances, the man murmuring something under his breath while his partner nodded. The Grand Hotel, normally a place of elegance and order, had transformed into the setting of a reckoning. Emily's confidence crumbled completely. Her hands trembled slightly, her polished posture now nothing more than a thin veil barely holding her together. "Mr. Reynolds, I I didn't realize, she attempted, her voice weak, barely audible. David's face remained neutral. He had heard enough excuses in his life. He had seen this happen far too many times. Emily could feel the walls closing in on her. David exhaled slowly, then turned to the hotel manager, his voice carrying the finality of a man who had made a decision. "Bring all employees here," he said firmly. "It's time for a staff meeting. Immediately." Emily's stomach dropped. She had seen countless staff meetings before, but never like this. And for the first time since she started working at the Reynolds Grand Hotel, she was no longer the one in control. Inside the grand conference room, the air was thick with tension and uncertainty. Rows of employees stood against the sleek glass walls, their backs straight, hands clasped in front of them. No one dared to speak. At the center of it all, Emily stood stiffly, her face drained of color. Her usual self-assured posture had disappeared, replaced by a rigid stillness. Her hands trembled slightly, gripping the hem of her blazer. She knew why she was here. Across the room, David stood at the head of the long conference table, arms crossed, his presence commanding yet calm. He looked over the gathered staff, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke. This was a test. A few employees shifted uncomfortably. Whispers rippled through the group as realization dawned on them. "And some of you failed miserably." His voice, though not raised, carried the weight of finality. David took a slow breath, his gaze moving from one staff member to the next. "I built this hotel to be a place of excellence, not just in luxury, but in service, in respect, in the way we treat people." The silence grew heavier. "But today, I learned something disappointing." His eyes landed on Emily. She didn't move. Her hands clenched at her sides. "Some of you judged a guest before you even knew who they were." Emily's breath hitched. David continued, his tone unwavering. "The way I was treated today tells me that some of you believe respect is something that should be given based on appearance. That privilege determines how a person is welcomed here." He glanced toward a young bellhop standing near the back, the same employee who, earlier that day, had seen David struggling with his luggage and offered to help, without hesitation, without judgment. "Not everyone failed," David said, his voice softer now. The bellhop's eyes widened slightly, not expecting to be noticed. David nodded. "Some of you understood what hospitality truly means." Then his expression hardened again. "But some of you proved that you don't belong in this establishment." His gaze returned to Emily. She felt her stomach drop. The room was completely silent now, all eyes on David. Then the words Emily had feared the most fell like a hammer. "Emily Lawson, you're fired." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Emily staggered back slightly. Her lips parted, her mind scrambling for something, anything, to say. "Mr. Reynolds, please, David raised a hand. She stopped mid-sentence. No explanations. No excuses. His tone was sharp, unyielding. "You judge someone based on nothing but your bias. That's unacceptable." Emily's hands clenched into fists, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but what could she possibly say? She had dismissed. A man humiliated him, made assumptions about him, only to realize he owned everything around her. There was no defending that. David looked at the hotel manager. Escort her out immediately." A hush fell over the room as a senior staff member stepped forward, placing a gentle but firm hand on Emily's shoulder. Her entire world unraveled in that moment. Everything she had worked for, gone in an instant. Her feet felt like lead as she turned toward the exit, her face burning with humiliation and regret. As she reached the door, David spoke one last time. "Let this be a lesson to everyone in this room. This hotel will never tolerate discrimination. Not now, not ever." As the door closed behind Emily, the staff members stood in stunned silence. David let the moment settle before his expression softened slightly. Then he turned to the young bellhop, the one who had offered kindness without question. "What's your name?" David asked. The bellhop swallowed hard. James, sir." David nodded. "James, today you proved something important." James blinked, clearly confused. "You saw a person, not a status," David continued. "That is what true leadership looks like." James stood frozen as David turned to the manager and said, "Effective immediately. James will be promoted to front desk manager." A murmur spread across the room. Gasps, surprised glances. James's eyes widened. "Sir, I don't know what to say." David smiled slightly. "Then don't say anything. Just keep doing what's right." The tension in the room shifted. Emily had lost everything in an instant. And James? He had just been given an opportunity beyond his wildest dreams. Justice had been served, not just in punishment, but in reward. And that, David knew, was the true lesson. The fallout from the incident at Reynolds Grand Hotel spread faster than anyone expected. What had started as an ordinary check-in had turned into a viral moment, a lesson in prejudice, and a brutal wake-up call for the hospitality industry. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story. The headline on a major business website read, "CEO disguised as guest faces racial bias in his own hotel. What happened next shocked everyone." On social media, people were outraged. "How does this keep happening in luxury spaces?" one tweet read, racking up thousands of likes. "This is why we say racism isn't just loud. It's in the small things, the assumptions, the dismissiveness," another person wrote. Conversations ignited about racial profiling, privilege, and the reality of discrimination in five-star establishments. Many praised David Reynolds for handling the situation with grace while still holding people accountable. Others shared their own experiences of being treated differently in high-end spaces. The discussion wasn't just about one hotel or one employee. It was about a system that allowed this type of judgment to happen in the first place. The pressure was mounting, and Reynolds Luxury Hotels had no choice but to respond. A formal statement was released. "At Reynolds Grand Hotel, we hold ourselves to the highest standard of service and inclusivity. The recent incident involving our CEO has led us to reflect on our policies, and we will be implementing a full retraining program for all employees. Discrimination in any form has no place here. We are committed to ensuring that every guest, regardless of appearance or background, is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve." Some called it damage control. Others called it a necessary step forward. But one thing was certain: the hotel industry was now under scrutiny. And if it could happen to a millionaire CEO in his own establishment, how often was it happening to ordinary guests who lacked the power to expose it? Days passed. The dust began to settle, But for Emily Lawson, life had taken a sharp, painful turn. Now unemployed, she walked past the very hotel she had once taken pride in working for. She had spent years at that front desk, deciding who was worthy of first-class treatment, believing she could judge people based on appearance alone. But now, she was on the outside looking in. As she stood across the street, she saw someone new standing behind the front desk. Her replacement, a young black woman, dressed professionally, speaking with a guest, a warm and confident smile on her face. The very same role Emily had held for years, now belonging to someone she would have likely dismissed. The irony hit her like a slap. She had spent so much time believing she was the gatekeeper to luxury. And now, she was the one locked out. With a heavy sigh, she turned away. There was no going back. And for the first time in her life, she understood what it felt like to be the outsider. Inside the hotel, David sat in the executive lounge, watching the waves of guests moving in and out of the lobby. Some were wealthy, some weren't. Some wore designer brands, others dressed casually. But the one thing that mattered? They were all guests. They were all deserving of respect. James, the newly promoted front desk manager, approached his table nervously. "Sir, I just wanted to say thank you again for this opportunity." David looked up, smiling. "No need to thank me, James. You earned it." James nodded, but hesitated. "If you don't mind me asking, why did you do it? Why the test?" David leaned back in his chair, glancing toward the front desk where his employees were now treating every guest with equal kindness. Then he answered, his voice calm but firm. "Respect should never be based on status. A true leader serves, not judges." James let those words sink in. David had built his empire not just to be a symbol of wealth, but to create something bigger, a place where every guest felt valued. And now, that message was finally being heard. David sat quietly, watching as guests moved through the grand lobby now greeted with warmth, respect, and professionalism. The change was noticeable. What had once been a silent, unconscious problem was now something no one could ignore. The lesson had been taught, not just to Emily, but to every employee who had witnessed what happened. But this wasn't just about one hotel. It was bigger than that. Because the truth was, judging someone based on appearance won't just cost you respect. It can cost you everything. Now, we want to hear from you. What would you have done in David's place? Would you have fired Emily on the spot? Would you have given her a second chance? Or do you think the problem runs deeper than just one person? Let us know in the comments. If this story made you think, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge assumptions and spark change. And this is just the beginning. Stay tuned for another eye-opening tale coming soon. Because the world is full of stories waiting to be told, and lessons waiting to be learned.